Chris Tyson has finally came out and addressed everything on camera for the first time.
MrBeast is actually
pretty tough.
Making me not feminine by wasting.
That is right. Today we're going to be looking into what Chris Tyson has to say about all the insane drama that has been going on the last month. There are so many misunderstandings, so many things that people are just assuming about Chris that today he clarifies, talks about openly, and lots of new information about MrBeast when he started actually knowing about Chris being trans. It's definitely worth the watch. Like the video if you enjoy the content and me covering all the latest news. Subscribe if you're new, and let's get into this. So this all took place on the Banter podcast. It's about a 50-minute long podcast, but I got some clips to talk about and to show that involve all the drama and give a lot more context and backstory. So the first thing I really talk about in regards to the drama is, do you remember the clip that was going extremely viral of MrBeast looking a little bit uncomfortable when sat next to Chris? Well, Carl and Chris joke around about that clip.
I love how easy it is to alter things and put it on the internet. Like, for instance,
also do.
We'll do an hour-and-a-half long live stream on MrBeast. They'll find one time where Jimmy isn't just explicitly smiling, and then all of a sudden he's uncomfortable.
Which I think is funny and important, even though it's a tiny bit of this footage, because it was used. That clip was used so much on TikTok, YouTube. Everyone trying to portray this narrative that MrBeast suddenly is uncomfortable with Chris. And Chris has been his friend for ages. It's not the case, and as you'll learn later, there's some things that will probably surprise a lot of you. Chris then goes on to talk about his experience, announcing everything on Twitter publicly.
I'm learning a lot about myself. A lot of people are forcing me to speed run learning about myself. I didn't know I was going to have to do it so fast, but I knew I was going to have to do it publicly. Which, you know, in the early years, it was like I was scared of, like, I grew up in the South. Like, what is everybody going to think when I come out as, like, you know, on HRT or, you know, like when I announce everything or whatever it is, what are they going to react?
And yeah, he talks about people forcing him to speed run learning about himself. At the height of this whole thing on Twitter, everyone, like everywhere, was just making assumptions after assumptions of things that they couldn't possibly even know about Chris. Obviously, it fits their narrative, their agenda, but, you know, they had no evidence, no facts, saying things like Chris has abandoned his family, Chris's wife is blindsided by it all, and her life is now over. When, again, if you keep watching the video, Chris does, in fact, talk about the breakup in the most detail he has. You also get an insight into where Chris grew up. I know a lot of people already knew this. He talks about he grew up in the South, very conservative, very religious. I also found it interesting in the podcast, Chris goes on to say that when he got the MrBeast gig, thought that someday he could use it to come out and be accepted and get support.
I've learned that there's actually a lot more supportive people, you know, in this area and stuff like that. But like after I got, you know, the whole MrBeast gig, for a while I was like, oh, you know, like maybe this is my way to get like support and I can come out one day.
Which is understandable. I'm sure some people are going to take it out of context and be like, yeah, see, he wants to push being trans down all the MrBeast fans' throats. There's been no MrBeast video where Chris is there pushing being trans down kids' throats like people are projecting or saying he was going to do. On top of that, kids know trans people exist. Just because MrBeast's friend is trans doesn't mean kids are suddenly going to start turning trans like people are trying to say or be brainwashed into it. Next thing is, and this is a big point in the whole Chris Tyson saga, is a lot of people were saying Chris was this manly man, southern boy, you know, how's he suddenly changed and transitioned? Well, first of all, you only get to see like 5% of someone on screen or online, and second of all, it's just assumptions again. So Chris actually puts this to bed by saying that he has known about him not being a cis male for a long time.
It started when I was younger. Like as a kid, I've always been obsessed with fashion, and like, you know, like when I got pushed back into the closet by myself, like I just wore jeans and t-shirts
But then in the closet's where you found all that fashion.
I did find, but it was actually my sister's closet. There came a point where I was like, okay, I really enjoy doing this. And because of where I was and, you know, growing up super conservative and religious and all that stuff, I was like, even at a young age, I had no clue what it was, but I knew I had to hide it, which has always been so fascinating to me. I knew to hide it before I even understood what it was, because I was like, this is not going to be received well.
And look, you're going to now get people saying, nah, he's just making this all up. This is a lie. Like, he's just saying it. Again, this whole thing has just been assumptions about another person's life, where people are really caring so much about what Chris does with his body. They're going to assume things just to fit what they want. Whereas Chris is telling us this has been ongoing for a long, long time. And you know, what started everything, this whole thing, was Chris's announcement that he was on HRT. He tweeted it out. That was the first indication Chris was transitioning. Chris, on this podcast, talks about that night, why he did it, and that he just felt a bit vulnerable on Twitter, and it just kind of came out.
And for me, the process has always been like an ebb and flow, a back and forth. The same thing with this last time, where it's like there's this huge shockwave and everything. I'm just so happy to be visibly trans now. And like the HRT, when I said HRT saved my life, like I can understand why so many people misunderstood that. I'm a doofus. I think I'm funny when I'm not.
So true.
It's so true. I just dropped out that I was on HRT just on I think it was like a Tuesday.
Was it just like random?
Yeah, I was just getting bullied, and you know, like people forget that, like, I'm sure, like, we don't talk about this, but we're creators. We see stuff. Our feelings get hurt. And you know, I'm going through a lot with the transition, you know, even though the separation is very clean and very like me and Katie are doing great and co-parenting and spending time together. It's still a hard process for anybody to go through. So I got a little defended, and I did the bit where everybody gets a little emotional on Twitter.
We get a little glimpse in that clip of his breakup with his wife, which people who made videos like Sunny V2 or people online were so obsessed about, how could you do this to your wife, as if it's their wife and they know everything about their marriage, saying it was a clean break. Chris dives into detail a little bit later and really puts these kind of speculation to bed by saying that, you know, his wife knew way before most people because she lived with him.
Another thing is that do you guys think that Katie for the last 7 years has not been living with me? She was 4 years my wife, 3 years my girlfriend, but it's like she was there the whole way. She was supportive in her own way. We were both figuring it out. But it's wild to see the narrative where like, oh, Katie's not supportive or stuff like that, cuz like she helped me get to where I am.
Which is obvious, and, you know, people just can't seem to grasp the fact that that can happen, and that he's co-parenting as any divorced couple would do. And divorces are extremely common, but again, that doesn't fit people who want to try and make out like Chris has destroyed a family. Like we touched on earlier, people were shocked with Chris transitioning because he was a southern manly man, or so they thought. Chris actually talks about that specifically because it was such a huge narrative.
A lot of people don't understand that I grew up on like a gigantic farm that was surrounded by other gigantic farms in the middle of nowhere. And me and my dog, like I would wake up like when I was like 9 years old, and I would me and my dog would go to the back of the farm, and I would have like, a pistol on my hip, and I would just walk around the farm at 9 years old and just adventure through the woods. And I was like, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. And,
was a young Tom Sawyer.
Yeah, I was a young Tom Sawyer. And then when I was like, 13 and 14, I would pack a book bag with some of my sister's clothes and sneak into the woods and spend the whole day like that. So it's so funny for me to see, people being like, you were such the manly influence. It's like I was spending. Yeah, they don't know.
Like they're saying, as common fucking sense would tell you, people online don't actually know what is going on in a creator's life. Even if they were a daily vlogger, they wouldn't know. But people who just post content and videos, specific videos, have no idea what is going on in their life. There's also a weird theory going around that MrBeast was actually paying for Chris's HRT for viewership and all of this shit. They joke around about that as well on the podcast.
Sometimes it's hard to be his friend.
The hardest part for you probably was whenever he paid you to start going on HRT.
He did. Not only that, it was the hardest part for me was to have to watch him chain you into a basement every night.
Yeah.
Chris also talks about, people's reactions, the fans who are attacking him.
And like I was able to look at the fans and be like, they're not going to attack me. Like, of course people are going to attack me. Are those the real fans? Maybe, maybe not. Who cares? Like, I know that right now what I'm focusing on is being the absolute best version of myself, being the best example and influence for not only my kid, but millions of kids out there, because that's a big responsibility.
A lot of people have attacked Chris, as we've seen in my previous videos, as we've seen online. You know, Chris is getting a lot of hate, a lot of backlash. And then one thing that, you know, I didn't know, and now I'm sure you guys didn't know, is that MrBeast has in fact known this about Chris since they were in college. You know, Chris outright told him in college, so he says.
I mean, Jimmy's known it since we were in college together. I accidentally walked out of a bedroom, like my bedroom and his bedroom were apart.
Just straight up naked.
No, but obviously not very cis het male. So, you know, I told him, and he told me, like, I told him, I was like, I don't really know what it is, and I don't know if I'm ever gonna be ready to like deal with it. And he was like, oh yeah, you know, he's like, I don't care, just like whenever it becomes a thing, just let me know. And then for like 7 years or however many years, I just didn't let him know.
It makes that even more hilarious Sunny V2 video where he's talking about Chris being like MrBeast's worst nightmare or something. MrBeast is known for ages. Chris is like one of his best friends. I mean, people like Sunny are so stupid where numbers is all that matters to you, and that's the only metric of any sort of value in the world. There's also a thing, you know, being friends with someone for a long time and loyalty that exists too. Clearly MrBeast, you know, has shown that with Chris.